Yes, this now it's Friday again, and we are live as every Friday. And today we have a special guest, Jonathan Conricus, joining us live from Israel. Good morning to you, Jonathan.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
How are you, and how is life? Are you located in, was it around central Israel, Tel Aviv area?
Yeah, Central Israel. On a personal level, I am very fortunate and blessed. I'm safe, so is my family. Not the situation for most Israelis. Many Israelis are in reserves. Many families are broken and shattered because the men are out fighting. Sadly, we still have 56 families that are waiting for the return of their loved ones. 56 hostages left in Hamas captivity. We hope that 20 are alive. We assume that 20 are alive and the rest, unfortunately, are dead. A little, comforting event a few days ago when Israeli special forces were able to retrieve the bodies of 2 Israelis that were murdered on the 7th of October, and their bodies were held by one of the extreme terror organizations in Gaza, and they're now being brought back for burial. But all in all, more than 608, I think we're 609 days of war. And there's a lot to do, a lot of challenges that remain. But the positive side is that Israel is still here. Economy is pretty strong for a country at war on 7 fronts. And we are making progress. Slow, late, but we are making progress against our enemies, and I hope we'll be able to discuss some of the progress that actually is happening on the ground.
Yes, as you mentioned that, let's segue right over to that. The war against Hamas. What is the current status there? Do we know how much of Hamas has been annihilated by the IDF? Is there any kind of statistics or percentages on that? Do you have some knowledge about that?
Yeah, it's the assessments that I understand from Israeli officials talking about 20 to 22,000 Hamas terrorists that have been killed, about the same amount or 1.5 times that have been wounded. But then on the other hand, you look at the amount of new recruits that Hamas has been able to recruit amongst the population, by the way, also using humanitarian aid as leverage and condition to get young Palestinians to join its ranks. We understand that they've also been able to recruit several thousands, if not more than 10,000 new Hamas operatives. So the current military situation is that Israel has degraded most of Hamas's capabilities. Almost all of the senior leadership of Hamas is gone. In some locations, the successor of the successor of the successor has been taken out. And in terms of senior military leadership, Israel has been quite successful in taking out most of the, if not all of the key members. In terms of infrastructure, Israel has degraded most of Hamas's significant infrastructure when it comes to rocket arsenals and hiding places. Most of the significant long-range rockets have either been fired or been destroyed. And the really important infrastructure that still remains in Hamas's hands are tunnels. There were so many tunnels dug under Gaza before the war, and probably during the war as well. Israel has dismantled maybe 6,000 shafts, entry points to tunnels, but there are still many tens, if not hundreds of kilometers of tunnels left in Gaza, and that is where Hamas are hiding, and that is what's keeping them alive. So that remains to be done. But at the military level, I would say that a lot of progress has been made. Had it not been for the fact that Hamas took 251 hostages on 7th of October, Israel would have been able to use totally different tactics when it comes to fighting in tunnels. We would have flooded or exploded all of them. We can't do that because we fear, of course, out of caution, not to, by any chance, hurt Israeli hostages that we know Hamas is keeping inside those tunnels. And that forces Israel to operate slowly and to expose troops to danger. Bottom line here, Hamas is suffering militarily. I think Hamas is on a media offensive, and they're getting help from their friends around the world, UN institutions, UNRWA in Gaza, various other so-called humanitarian institutions, and they're getting a lot of soft and nice coverage in international media, but they are under pressure. And what we're seeing now, when Israel has finally started to provide aid directly to Palestinian populations through an American organization, is that for the first time, there's a real threat to Hamas's position of controlling the population, because they've been taken out of the equation when it comes to distributing food. And all of the things I spoke about, military leadership, rockets, tunnels, that's very important. And you cannot win a war without killing, destroying, and all of those negative words that people in the West don't want to use anymore. But you defeat an enemy by inflicting pain, killing, destroying, etc. But then it's very important to keep in mind that we cannot defeat Hamas without distancing and creating a rift between Hamas and the population in Gaza. And that is happening now for the first time. There's a humanitarian American NGO, humanitarian organization, that has already provided more than 8 million meals in a week and a half to Palestinians. And that's a good start. Not yet enough, but it's a very good start.
I read today that the GHF Gaza Humanitarian Fund has closed all its distribution centers until further notice. Do you know any more about the details about this and what it'll take for them to reopen it? Not just the ones they have, but also to open more centers?
I know that they were temporarily closed yesterday, but that they're up and running. You may have more updated information, but what I read is that the center in Tel Sultan and the center in the Saudi neighborhood in Rafah are up and running, and that work is underway to build centers in central Gaza and even in northern Gaza. I know that they've been up and running. There's been 1.5 or 2 days in the last week where they were forced to close, to reconstruct, to build infrastructure, and to make the access to those locations better and safer. And I think that is what they're doing. But as far as I know, and the last I've read, they are up and running and distributing food. Israeli trucks are delivering food into Gaza, and then the American NGO is delivering the food to Palestinians who are coming to the distribution centers. Like anything in war, dynamic, messy, challenging. And I think we should it's important to keep in mind the context here. Hamas has a clear interest in derailing the process of distributing food, which doesn't come through UNRWA. When I say UNRWA, inadvertently, that is Hamas. And Hamas has a real strong interest in trying to divert and to ruin this process. That's why we've seen violence there. That's why we've seen Hamas trying to stoke fear and to cause Palestinians not to go to those centers and receive food. And of course, they're leveraging international media and UN organizations in trying to discredit this effort. I don't think that's going to work, because Palestinians, like, are human beings. They're hungry, and they will get food where food is available. Right. And food is available. It's safe, it's clean, it is dignified food that they are getting from the GHF. And I think we should look into the context of who would stand to gain from the centers, distribution centers not working. That's only Hamas. So there's been hiccups, and it's the first week or second week of work. I think it should be anticipated, but all in all, going forward, and I hope to see safe, steady supply of food to Palestinians, not through the hands of Hamas and UNRWA, but directly to the people who need it. And that will take a very important political tool out of the hands of Hamas, and it could be the beginning of the end of Hamas.
While we're on the topic of the GHF, we've been hearing lately these accusations against IDF for firing towards civilians in the context of GHF. Do you know anything about this? What happened there, and what are these rumors and these accusations?
Yeah, I think that there's a grain of truth. There have been instances of disturbances and threats in those locations. I believe, I do not have evidence for this yet, but I believe it was instigated by Hamas, which they have, as I said, they have this interest in destabilizing and causing this whole system to fail. So what I believe has happened, and again, this is my assessment, I don't have video footage to support it, but what I've seen of video footage of Hamas firing into the crowds and inciting violence, that probably caused Israeli troops on 2 locations to fire warning shots. Some shots were probably also fired towards the legs of people that were hostile and posed a threat to Israeli forces. And then what we don't know yet is, have people been killed? And if they've been killed, who killed them? There's conflicting reports coming out. I still, maybe I'm naive, but I still lend credibility when the Red Crescent is reporting numbers of people that were wounded and killed. They claim that Palestinians have been killed in southern Gaza. And I know that there's been an incident where Israeli forces used fire. I know that Israeli forces were not trying to kill anybody, but I know that Hamas was instigating an event in order to try to create a mass casualty event, again, in order to derail the distribution of food. So bottom line, I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know exactly who fired what. I suppose that people were killed about a week ago. I don't know how many, but I do know who would stand to gain from that happening. That's Hamas. That is the only thing that I do know. But I know that directives have been given to Israeli troops to be more careful and to be slower to use deadly force based on the understanding that this serves Hamas. And I think that the pause in distribution was also related to this, that GHF and the IDF want to create an even safer and more robust environment in the area that leads towards the distribution centers, so that Palestinians can approach and can do so safely, and that there will be less room for interference by Hamas on those areas. I hope that will continue, and I think it will, and I think we'll see improvement. And I hope, bottom line, the most important thing, that Palestinians will be able to get food, that they'll prevent famine and shortage of food, and that Hamas will run out of political power and leverage over the population.
Right. So I have one comment and one question. The comment is that there's sometimes the press presents evidence in the form of saying that there's the ordnance that has been used, the bullets that they find in the hospitals report are 5.56 and 7.62 millimeter. And what people have pointed out, this is ammunition used both by the IDF and Hamas. So you can't. The fact that it's NATO ammunition, the 5.56, doesn't prove that it's Israel that fired it. These are weapons that Hamas has as well. So that
you're right.
Well.
It doesn't. You're right. It doesn't prove. And the media environment, or the entire information environment in Gaza is heavily contaminated. We see conflicting reports. Of course, the so-called Gaza Health Ministry, this has been spoken about, and I know that you guys have spoken about it as well. That's a branch of Hamas. And for some reason that defies my understanding and logic, international media, CNN, New York Times, BBC, Washington Post, AP, continue to rely on what Hamas is saying and to report it almost as at face value, without saying that this is Hamas information. And we've seen both the BBC and the Washington Post being forced to retract their reporting, their so-called reporting on the topic, because they based their reporting, their big headlines about allegations that 31 Palestinians were killed or 27 were killed, that Israeli tanks were firing at civilians, and many other allegations that were proven false. And they were forced to issue what they call clarifications, not apologies, but clarifications that their coverage wasn't right and that it fell below professional standards. Both BBC and the Washington Post were forced to do so. But that's, of course, after the damage is done, after the narrative has been set, after millions of people, maybe hundreds of millions of people around the world, they read the headline that this and that happened, and then people just move on. And sadly, when the Washington Post issues a clarification 4 days after the matter that actually we relied on false data and we didn't clarify and we didn't wait for an Israeli proper response, the damage is done. I will say one thing, however. I think that Israel is not doing itself any good services by responding too slowly to this media warfare. I, as an Israeli, would want to see a media offensive. I would want to see 10 drones up in the air broadcasting live from the distribution centers, showing what's going on. I would want to have embedded international media at the distribution centers, showing international audiences what's going on. And I think that Israel is addressing this issue strategically wrong. And I think we should be doing better, much better. And the fact that Israel is not addressing it smartly, of course, allows Hamas and people in UN institutions and international media who are positive towards Hamas and their aspirations, it gives them the advantage. And that is regrettable. And I think Israel should be doing better. And it should be doing better to inform people around the world, like your audience and other good people who are not terror supporters or anti-Semites, but just read the news as they receive them. And they're not getting good information because this is what's out there. Part of it because journalists are lazy and biased, but part of it because Israel is not doing a good enough job at explaining reality on the ground. And that needs to change.
I feel like it is so dangerous as well with this constant disinformation about Israel and this constant demonizing. I feel lately we've seen a red line been crossed in Washington, D.C., where this beautiful couple was gunned down by this crazy guy who was sat on a plane from Chicago into Washington, brought his gun and gunned them down in front of the Jewish Museum. And I feel like there's a correlation there between this constant demonizing and creating this kind of atmosphere which leads extreme people to just tip over the edge and do those kinds of things. Do you also see a correlation and a pattern there and a connection with what we're seeing in the media and extreme people doing those kinds of things?
Definitely. You know, terror supporters and Hamas sympathizers have been marching on Norwegian streets, American, English, German, French, Canadian, Australian streets, and some of them have been chanting, "Globalize the Intifada." When you say globalize the Intifada, and when you're cheering and happy after the October 7 massacre, which we saw spontaneous and organized demonstrations of joy and happiness on European streets and American and Australian and Canadian streets, when you say globalize the Intifada, that is what you are referring to. That is what you're aspiring. That Jews and Israelis around the world will be targeted, whether they are military, whether they are serving, whether they are ordinary civilians, women, children, elderly. If it's Jewish, if it's Israeli, it is a legitimate target. That is what globalize the Intifada means. And those are dangerous words, chanted and spoken and reiterated in social media, on US campuses and on many other universities and in international media. So, of course, there are real world consequences for this kind of rhetoric. And I think there's lots of people who should be held accountable for creating this atmosphere, this conducive atmosphere which legitimizes killing of Jews and globalizing the Intifada. The BBC, I think, has tremendous responsibility. Al Jazeera is not only a terror supporter, but it is actively promoting this agenda, inciting, calling for violence, radicalizing Arabs and Westerners, Muslims and Christians and non-identified people, constantly drip feeding this hatred, this vilification of everything that's Israeli, this demonization of Israel and its actions, and really distorting. Now, you know, I'm for free media. I'm for freedom of speech. That's a bedrock of civilization, of democracy, of an enlightened society. But what we've seen, what I've seen as an Israeli over, you know, the last 610 days, is a media that in many cases working as a mouthpiece for Hamas and really justifying killing of Israelis. And sadly, we see that happening, and we see weak law enforcement around the country. Police forces, I felt this very clearly when I was in Oslo about a year ago. I remember standing, we were at a peaceful police-approved demonstration outside of the Norwegian parliament, and I looked on the other side across the square, and there were hundreds, if not thousands, of pro-Hamas supporters who were there, who were violent, who were trying to breach police barricades, and who put up an encampment, a tent, in the middle of the square in the Norwegian capital. No permit, obstructing peace, basically conquering, taking control of public property, and the police doesn't stop them. I don't know if it's still there, but just as an example, and we've seen that happen in many places, in US universities, in Canada, we see it happen in Australia. I witnessed such events in Melbourne and in Sydney. We've seen it in lots of occasions in Canada, in Toronto, and in Montreal. We've seen it in Washington, D.C., in San Francisco, L.A. Law enforcement that is probably told by weak and coward politicians not to uphold law and order, not to protect Jewish civilians, Jewish citizens of that country. And then you see consequences. I see a direct line that connects between media incitement, weak and cowardly politicians, weak law enforcement, selective law enforcement, and then crazy people, deranged crazy people taking matters into their own hands and trying to kill, and sometimes succeeding, Jews and Israelis and people who support them.
Right. Can we, I'd like, because this is something you're up on too, is the situation against what I would call the Iran front, Israel, but really not just Israel, the rest of us also have a mortal enemy in Iran. They really want to tear down our civilization, starting with Israel. And I understand that you're paying attention to everything that's going on there with the negotiations between the U.S. and Iran, but also what happened recently in Beirut and Iran's proxy Hezbollah there. Do you want to give us a briefing on where things are and where you think they're going?
Yeah, so I think this is super important because, as you say correctly, it's a top strategic issue. But a lot of people in Europe and in North America, I'm not sure how aware they are because there's so much other noise and things that are happening that are taking attention of people. But this is a real strategic, long-term matter of national security. The Iranians have been trying to and have proceeding and making great advances at creating a nuclear weapon. According to the last report by the International Atomic Agency, Iran has enough enriched uranium for 10 nuclear bombs. And they have enriched material up to 60%, which there's no civilian use, there's no civilian purpose for anybody to enrich above 3.67 or 4%. If you enrich 60%, the only thing you need that for is for weapons. So the Atomic Agency says very clearly Iran is enriching material in order to be able to create a bomb. We know that the Iranians are very busy with building, with advancing the technology, with building missiles, and with actually creating nuclear bombs. That is the what's at stake here. Now, many countries, unfortunately, have nuclear military capabilities. None of them are extremist Islamist regimes. Pakistan has nuclear weapons, but I think that the Iranian regime is far more extremist and radical than the Pakistani regime. And what the Iranians are saying very clearly in Persian is that their goal is to destroy the state of Israel, to annihilate the state of Israel. I do not want a regime like that, which is governed by crazy fundamentalist Islamists, to have nuclear weapons. I think that would be terribly dangerous for the region, for Iran, for Israel, and also for Europe, and maybe someday for the entire West. That is what's at stake. And that is what we're trying to prevent. Now, the talk of the negotiations here is about whether or not the Iranians will have the ability to enrich on Iranian soil. What the US is saying is no, that should not be allowed, because if you can enrich to 4%, you can enrich to 60 and then 90%. It's only a matter of time, and you can hide and obfuscate, and then we'll find ourselves in a reality where Iran has a bomb, and that cannot be allowed. That was basically the JCPOA. It allowed the Iranians to enrich to a certain level, and to exactly nobody's surprise, they transgressed and exceeded that. And now they have, according to Atomic Agency reports, enough enriched material for 10 bombs. They're playing hardball, the Iranians, and they have rejected the American offer of making a deal without Iran having local enrichment capabilities, but that Iran would receive or be able to buy enriched material for civilian use, which is what they claim that their nuclear program is for. So we're in an interesting situation. Now, what a lot of people aren't talking about is that, as per the JCPOA, the agreement from 2015, in a few weeks' time, the time will be up for a snapback of sanctions to be put in place. The US is out of the picture because President Trump, in his first tenure, walked out of the deal, but the three European powers are still in the deal: France, UK, and Germany. And they are soon going to have to make a decision. Are they going to snap back sanctions on the Iranian regime because they are violating the agreement? They are enriching above, way above what they're supposed to enrich. Or are we not going to? I know that the Iranians are very concerned. And if the European countries do what they need to do, snap back sanctions, that will mean a lot for the situation in the region. That will mean a lot for the Iranian economy. And it could be a serious thing. Now, President Trump, I believe, doesn't want to be seen as someone who is softer than the Europeans, right? But the Europeans could be taking a strong, hard step here against the Iranians, stronger than what Trump is doing. So we're in the coming weeks, this is really going to boil down to the coming weeks, a lot to watch. And of course, we have, I think we would be remiss if we didn't speak about the military option. Israel is ready, prepared to strike the Iranian nuclear program. The sites that everybody knows about, the sites that Israel knows about, the sites that only the Iranians believe that they know about. There's a lot of layers here of different intelligence and different awareness, but Israel has been preparing for this for quite a long time. I understand media reports that indicate that President Trump has told Israel, wait, don't attack while we are negotiating, but the Israeli military option and perhaps a joint Israeli-US option are on the table. And the more that Iran says no and rejects American offers for negotiations, the bigger the chances of the military option are. I personally believe, and I'm not a warmonger, but I personally believe that the world, we've given diplomacy a long time to have an effect. Sadly, it has not worked. The Iranians are marching towards nuclear military capabilities. That must be prevented. If the only way of preventing it, derailing it, or delaying it is by using force, after we've exhausted all of the diplomatic efforts, then I think that is what needs to be done. And I personally believe that the Iranian regime will not stop until it is forced to stop. And I think it is a global interest to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons.
Yes. Also, what has happened lately in Beirut regarding Hezbollah? Can you update us a little bit on that situation as well?
Yeah, last night Israel struck in the heart of Hezbollah-controlled areas in southern Beirut, the area referred to as Dahya. And what Israel struck was an underground facility where Israeli intelligence indicated that Hezbollah was building drones and other strategic weapons, important weapons, to be able to use against Israel. Israel warned before, made sure that civilians were not there, told the population to stay clear of the area, and waited for civilians to evacuate, then struck the underground facilities. Initial BDA seems positive. Battle damage assessment seems positive that indeed the intended targets were struck and destroyed. As always, Hezbollah, like Hamas, they hide their infrastructure underground. They hide it underneath the civilian population, underneath civilian buildings. So it's difficult to get to, but Israel was able to get to it. And eventually, I believe that the BDA is good. We haven't had official confirmation from Israel yet, but I believe that the BDA is good and that the military targets indeed were destroyed. What this means is that Hezbollah continues to try to rearm itself. Hezbollah sustained heavy blows during the war. Israel attacked and destroyed a lot of its infrastructure, its key military leadership, its money, its communications capabilities, its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, and many of its rank and file operatives. And what Hezbollah is trying to do is to rearm itself. Maybe they are motivated and seeing the quite magnificent things that the Ukrainians have been able to do with drones, and they're taking inspiration from them. I don't exactly know, but bottom line, what Israel is saying that no, we are not going to allow Hezbollah to rearm itself. We are not going to allow a second monster to be positioned north of Israel. And whenever they try to rearm, buy capabilities, stockpile weapons, or whatever Hezbollah is doing, we're going to attack it. Now, it's important to emphasize, last thing, that of course Israel is communicating with the Americans and the French, who are guarantors of the ceasefire and are overseeing the situation. Israel isn't acting on its own. And first, Israel tries to warn and indicate that Hezbollah is doing something wrong. And when no action is taken and warnings are not heeded, then Israel takes action, and that is what we've seen. As far as I know, maybe you'll correct me, but I'm not aware of any civilian casualties. I know of damage in Beirut, but I'm not aware of any civilian casualties, which again is on par with how the IDF operates. If the IDF can achieve the military objective without causing civilian casualties, great. That is what the IDF will do, and will warn ahead of time before we strike. If that isn't possible because the enemy is using human shields, then sadly there are collateral damage, and people are unfortunately suffering the consequences of that they're used as human shields. But this is a good example of Israel doing what needs to be done with no civilian casualties.
So on that particular tactical situation in Beirut, again, sort of a comment and a question. The comment is, a lot of people don't realize that Beirut is heavily organized into different neighborhoods, and there's some Hezbollah neighborhoods, and there's some Christian neighborhoods and so forth, so that generally, the IDF and other intelligence agencies knows where they're going to be hanging out. The other thing, and maybe this isn't something I paid attention to, but was this an air operation, or was it a ground operation where they were able to take out those tunnels?
This was an air operation, a surgical strike with different types of ordnance that were dropped from various types of aircraft, fixed-wing fighter jets. And the way that the IDF operates, and we have Israeli Air Force has a lot of experience with this, is different strike angles and different delaying mechanisms or fuses, which allow bombs to penetrate below the ground before they explode. So they cause very little damage above ground to civilians and focus the effect underground, in this case, a factory where Hezbollah were building drones, and the destruction is underground and not above ground. And that is what Israel did this time.
Right.
Yep. Go ahead,
No,
Leif.
so, well, I'm just kind of interesting because also with respect to both Gaza and Iran, this sort of bunker busting capability is something that the U.S. only used to have. And that's why, there's a need for the U.S. to take part in joint operations in Iran if they're going to take out the really heavy duty facilities. But it sounds like Israel is developing military technology very, both sort of the ordnance and the tactics to penetrate pretty deeply and take underground facilities out.
Yes, the only thing I could say without, exposing things that haven't been exposed is that, there's more than one way to skin a cat when it comes to taking hardened underground targets. There's the kinetic blunt force of dropping lots of deep penetrating bunker busters, one after the other, and basically peeling away layers of soil and concrete until you get to the target. That acquires strategic bombers, very big ordnance, 20,000-pound bombs that penetrate and create very big craters. Or there's other ways, and Israel is preparing military capabilities to do it in more than one way.
Mm-hmm.
Israel has demonstrated in Syria and elsewhere the ability to operate with various tactics and with various tools in order to take out those types of targets. And all things are being considered. And I think the Iranians are aware of this. They're trying to put in place countermeasures. We'll have to wait and see what Israel and the US chooses. And I share your assessment. I think it's important that this is in the future it will be a joint Israeli and US strike and not only an Israeli one, because it will have stronger effect.
Mm-hmm.
In the media, especially here in Norway and also Western media everywhere, we see this word genocide tossed around all the time. What are your comments and thoughts about that, these genocide accusations against Israel?
I think that's the biggest failure of a genocide in history. If there ever was such an aspiration, and of course there isn't, then you just have to look at numbers. The size of the Arab population in Israel, Israeli citizens who are Arabs and Muslims, keeps on growing. There are about 2 million Arab Muslims living in Israel. They have a very healthy birth rate, and they are part of Israeli society. There are Arab judges, there are Arab politicians, there are Arab policemen, there are Arabs even in the military, and there are many very affluent and powerful Arabs in Israeli society, and the population is growing. Palestinian population in Judea and Samaria is growing at a very high rate, and to claim that Israel is conducting anything, of that nefarious nature, I think is ridiculous. Ridiculous based on reality on the ground, and also ridiculous based on Israel's action. Had Israel wanted to, as you say, do such a horrible thing, then Israel has the military capacity to do horrible things and to kill lots and lots of people. Israel has never tried to do that. On the contrary, Israel is trying to use precise military capabilities in order to achieve military objectives without killing civilians, without causing unnecessary damage to civilian infrastructure. And Israel operates according to the principle of proportionality and military necessity. And to claim that Israel is trying to kill Palestinians and to conduct that horrible thing it is absurd, unfounded, false. I think it's based on ignorance and hatred to claim such a thing. And I think that all facts refute it. Had Israel wanted to do such a thing, then there wouldn't have been any Arabs living in Israel or Palestinians in Judea and Samaria or Gaza, because Israel has the military capacity to do so. But we never tried, and we never will. That is not what we are. That is not what Israel is. We are fighting an evil terrorist enemy that is using their civilians as human shields. And I would say that the vast majority of unfortunate casualties, Palestinian civilian casualties in this war, are a direct result of the fact that Palestinians were not allowed to evacuate out of the Gaza Strip by Egypt and by the international community. And when Israel operated in areas and warned ahead of time, they either chose not to move or they were forced to stay by Hamas in combat areas. And the third thing is that Hamas has all of its military infrastructure hidden underground the civilians. And the only way that Israel can fight Hamas is by attacking that infrastructure. These are the reasons why there are civilian casualties. And if you look at the facts, Israel warns ahead of time. Israel calls on the civilian population to evacuate areas. Why? Because it makes it easier? Because it gives us an advantage? No, it actually negates military logic. It's against military logic to tell your enemy when and where you're coming. And that is what Israel is doing and continues to do. We did it last night in Beirut, and we did it a few nights ago in Gaza. It doesn't serve any military advantage. You ruin the whole effect of surprise. But we do it because we don't want civilians to be affected by the fighting. So I think those claims are ridiculous. They are false. They're absurd. The fact that they are entertained by legal forums like the ICJ and the ICC, I think is a black spot in the history of these organizations. It's shameful that these organizations have been hijacked and are doing the dirty work of terrorist organizations by trying to blame Israel for such an atrocity. But eventually truth will out, and anybody that claimed these preposterous things against Israel will be proven false. I can only hope that they will be held accountable for what they've said and the allegations that they have thrown against Israel.
What would, just to get back to the war, what do you think victory would look like for Israel in Gaza right now? When we'll be able to say, that Hamas has been defeated?
Yeah, that's a very important topic. First and foremost, I believe victory is attainable, and I believe that Israel will defeat Hamas and exit victorious from this war, which Israel didn't want, didn't start, and wasn't prepared for. Really, victory is not military. Victory, in my mind, is when you'll be able to come to Israel, Henrik and Leif, when you'll come to Israel in a few years' time, we'll drive down to Kibbutz Kfar Aza or to Be'eri or any other Israeli community in the envelope area, and we'll go and see flourishing communities full of people, peaceful, orderly, restructured, and when we'll see a waiting list in the kindergarten, when there's lots of babies being born, when Israelis are safe to live in their homes, when security has been restored, and when there's no threat to Israeli civilians, that is victory. When there's a strong economy and positive growth of population, that is to my mind, the only victory that matters. And then there's steps along the way. The military part is a step, it's a milestone. Defeating Hamas, separating between Hamas and the population, killing Hamas leadership, and forcing them to surrender, forcing them to come out and say, we've had enough. We've had enough. We can't fight anymore. We're out of weapons. We're out of food. We're out of electricity and fuel, and we're done. We can't fight anymore. We give up. I think we will achieve that eventually, and I think the civilian population in Gaza will eventually be detached from Hamas's oppression and Hamas's tyranny. Where I think Israel should be doing better is to present a plan, a strategic plan that says this is where we are now. In a few months' time, this is where we want to be. And in a year or two, this is what we want to be. And these are the partners that we wish to be working with regional powers, global powers, working together and saying our goal for the future of Gaza is this: a demilitarized, independent entity that is not governed by Hamas, not governed by the corrupt Palestinian Authority, but that has massive investment in infrastructure, that is oriented towards prosperity for the people who live there, which is safe and dignified and prosperous for them, for the Palestinians. That, I think, should be the vision. And I regret that Israeli leadership is not presenting that, because I think that you have to be positive. You have to take initiative. You have to say, this is where we want to take this, to move things. And it's not enough to say we are not going to agree with this and know that and know that. That's not good enough. You have to be positive and say, this is where we want to go. And then other people and organizations and countries and leaders, they will say, okay, you know what, that's a good solution. And I think that's missing, and that's regrettable. But there's no easy fix here. Gaza has been troubled with extremism, poverty, horrible governance, corruption for as long as Gaza has existed. Under Egyptian occupation and then under Israeli control or occupation, it has always been the least developed, the more extreme, the places where there's been more religious fundamentalism. And it's going to take a lot of creative work and a lot of resources to change that. And where I think Israel should be doing better is to present a plan and to have vision and leadership and say, this is where we want things to go for our sake, but also for their sake. Because we understand that there cannot be stability and prosperity and security for Israelis if we have a mess on the other side. And it's our interest not to have a mess on the other side, not to have Hamas or the Palestinian Authority control it, but to put in place fair, uncorrupt governance that works for the people, for the Gazans, and then gets international support and funding to do it. But that is victory. That is what we are aspiring to do. And I'm hopeful that in a few years' time, we'll be able to come to the kibbutzim in the surroundings, and we'll see nice gardens, renovated houses, people smiling, feeling safe, with strong economy, high tech and investment, and with the positive growth of population. And on the other side, in Gaza, rebuilding infrastructure, governance that works for the people, not for jihad and not for some crazy ideology to try to kill the Jews, but something that is positive and says we want to go forward and we want to live peaceful lives. And I hope that we'll be able to see that.
Right. Something else that has gone viral this week was Natasha Hausdorff versus Dave Smith on Piers Morgan, where I feel like my reaction to it was that it was just a way to incite the divisiveness and polarization, because I feel like Piers Morgan didn't allow Natasha Hausdorff to speak, and she's an internationally renowned expert on international law. What was your reaction to those viral clips that everybody's talking about this latest week?
Yeah, I was on Piers's show the night before, and debated a guy called Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks. I would put him and this Dave Smith in the same category of clowns, people who know very little about the reality on the ground, people who are populist and they're basically entertainers, and their livelihood is clicks, promotions, and viewers and exposure. Sadly, Piers puts these people on, he gives them a platform, and when serious people who have knowledge about the topic are there, it gives credibility to the platform. And I found myself dealing with, a rambling, screaming, unhinged person who was just, shouting anti-Semitic allegations against me. Basically, like when he got frustrated, he was, basically reading the protocol of the elders of Zion and everything wrong in the world, throwing that at me. And what we saw with Natasha, I think someone on Twitter counted 60 interruptions, 60 times that Piers interrupted Natasha. I think she did very well to keep her composure. She's a very smart and eloquent woman. She knows her stuff. She's an expert. She doesn't talk about things that she doesn't know. She talks about things that she has understanding, and where she doesn't know, then she says so, and she exercises caution and restraint. And I think what we're seeing is, this is a good example of how low Piers's program has gone, and how populist it is to behave in such a way. Very, very regrettable. I've been on Piers' program many times. Sometimes it has been meaningful debate. Sometimes more than the others. It has been shouting contests. And I think my advice for Piers would have been to apologize, to say to Natasha, okay, you know what? I don't agree with what you say for whatever reason, but I shouldn't have interrupted. I shouldn't have been so bullish. I shouldn't have been so rude and ungentlemanly, and I should have allowed you to speak. And I should have treated you with respect as someone who is a subject matter expert, and not behave as I did. I was wrong. That's what I think he should have done as a gentleman, as an important media personality. But instead, he's doing the opposite. He's doubling down. He is again, leveling accusations. He's insulting and Natasha again. And I don't know why he's doing it. Maybe because it's getting a lot of attention. Maybe because more people are aware of him. But I think eventually it is not good for him as a person, not good for him in his professional credentials as journalist, former journalist. And I think it's not a good look at all. And it exposes him in not a good light at all. When I look at the people who have been on his platform, he has platformed really fringe, extreme people, Holocaust deniers, terror sympathizers, people who call for genocide of Jews, people who deny that October 7 was a Hamas attack. He's had people on that are extremely questionable and I would say quite loathsome. And he was not rude to them. He platformed them. He was very kind and polite. He didn't ask them any tough questions. And the fact that he was so rude towards Natasha, I think that proves bias, and that is not good. So bottom line here, I wish that we could have more civilized and professional debates that are based on fact, based on knowledge and experience, not on conjecture, not on populism, not on screaming obscenities and using big, heavy, important, and fancy words like genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, every second sentence without them having any meaning. And I think Piers has responsibility to change that. And I think he should.
Yeah. Also, we get some viewer questions here. Odrun asks, what does Jonathan Conricus think about Greta Thunberg and the rest who are on their way to Gaza?
Yeah, I grew up in Sweden, so I used to watch Greta when she was first a local phenomena in Sweden, and then I've seen her ascent to global fame, and then her descent into radicalized terror sympathizer. I think she is despicable in what she is doing. She is providing platforms for Hamas. She is fueling anti-Semitism around the world. She claims to be a voice for good, but she is not. She has been radicalized. She is, I think, dangerous. I think, yes, freedom of expression is important, but in terms of what she is saying and doing, absolutely reprehensible. And I hope that they never get close to Gaza. And I really hope that someone would take her aside, someone who cares about her, and really educate her about how wrong she is and how dangerous the things that she is doing and supporting is. She's become a Hamas sympathizer. She's become someone who hates the West, who hates Western society. She's become someone who undermines Western society and supports a lot of bad things. Very regrettable. And in short, I don't think that she and the rest of the Hamas supporters on board of that vessel will reach Gaza. They will be stopped before. And I don't think that they will be given the opportunity to do propaganda from Gaza. Hopefully they'll be stopped in smart and non-kinetic ways, not to give them any platform to scream about. But really, if this is the person who is, the voice of Palestinians, then the Palestinian cause is, I think, in a very, very bad shape.
Yes, Sul Kasti also asks, Syria said it would never be a threat to anyone in the region, but still they fired rocket fire on Israel. What do you think will happen with Israel and Syria in the future?
That's a good question. Yes, first of all, I have to give credit. I have to give credit to the new Syrian landlords for very good strategic communication and discipline when it comes to their messaging. They're very good. They made a clever transition from khaki and uniforms to suits, changed their appearance, changed their haircuts, changed their branding, and the world likes it. Global powers like it, Arab powers like it, Europe likes it, the US likes it, and it's working well. And they have been pretty disciplined in their strategic communications, and it's working. So credit to them. Syria is a threat to the region. Syria is a threat, a possible threat to Israel. And they have a lot of work now in Syria to try to consolidate a very, very dynamic situation with lots of external influence. The Turks are meddling in Syrian affairs. So are the Iranians trying to. So is Hezbollah still trying to. So are the Russians, and the new Syrian leadership is trying to regain control over their country. It's still a lawless area. Anarchy is just around the corner, and it's still a viable threat that they will lose control and Syria will descend into anarchy. That's a big threat towards Israel. And the rocket that was fired a few nights ago at Israel, and thankfully didn't cause any casualties, was reportedly fired by jihadi elements in southwestern Syria, that are trying to escalate the situation and cause tension between Israel and Syria. I've seen Syrian regime take action against them, and of course Israel took action against them. It's still ambiguous. We're still not out of the woods. Things can go very bad in Syria and things can go positive. In a few days, I'm going to, or maybe tomorrow, I have a video out on my channel called The Bottom Line, where I'll be speaking about the possibilities of peace between Israel and Lebanon and the possibilities of positive things happening between Israel and Syria. I think that they exist. I think that if many positive things happen on the way, we can see good developments in the region. That will be good for Syria, good for Lebanon, good for Israel, and good for the region. But there's also a lot of negative forces, the Turks, the Iranians, Hezbollah, the Russians, that will try to derail, maybe the Qataris as well, that will try to derail this. But there can happen positive things. Since we're not out of the woods, Israel has to be very cautious and vigilant. So what Israel is doing is adding layers of security and making sure that messaging-wise and capabilities on the ground, Syrians understand that Israel has a no-nonsense policy. You do not threaten Israel. Don't move military capabilities close to Israel. We will not tolerate any threats to Israeli civilians. If there's threats, we will take care of them immediately using kinetic capabilities, using the military. And if you want positive things, Israel is all for it. If you want to expand Abraham Accords, if you want to have trade, if you want to have investment, joint ventures, Israel, I think, would be very positive towards that, because it would be great for Israelis and for Syria if we could have peace or normalization. I don't think that we're quite there yet, but I think it is possible. And what the Syrian leadership, I think they understand, is that if you want to achieve good things for Syria, then first and foremost, you have to stabilize the country, make sure that there's no threat to Israel and the region. And if that happens, then good things can follow.
We are moving towards the end of the show here, and we're so appreciative of your time, Jonathan. Thank you so much for being a part of this show. And a final topic just on the going towards the end here is that we heard news about the new.
If we have limited time, this is really interesting. Yeah. But if we have limited time, Jonathan, I want to make sure that you have time to talk about the Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
Yes,
where you're a senior fellow right now. This is one of the organizations that's actually very influential in the discourse internationally, but nobody has ever heard about it in Norway. So I want to make sure that people get some familiarity with that as well. I'm sorry to interrupt, Henrik, but I just
fine. That's fine.
No, thank you for that, Leif. I think that's very important, because there's lots of people. I remember going on a speaking tour in Scandinavia, and I spoke in front of hundreds of people in various locations in Stockholm and Uppsala and in Gothenburg and in Oslo. There were several hundred of people in the room. It was the Norwegian Israel friendship. Med Israel for
fred.
For fred. Yeah. So hundreds of people there, and one of the biggest questions was, where can we obtain good information? How can we know what's going on? How can we get information from reliable sources? And I think the Foundation for Defense of Democracies is excellent people, very smart, very focused, hard-working, diligent people, critical, and always reading between the lines and careful, but very, very prolific. And people around the world in Europe may not be aware of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, because it focuses on the US. It focuses on US foreign policy, and it focuses on having influence on US decision makers for the benefit of US foreign policy. But it also focuses on defending democracies worldwide. And I would recommend that people sign up for FDD. They go to fdd.org and they sign up for the different topics that they are interested in getting push notifications about. And the FDD does lots of notifications every day, flash briefs about certain topics. So depending on what people are interested in, global jihadism, global jihad, counterterrorism, nuclear Iran, Russia. We have Russian experts that analyze what Russia is doing, China, cyber warfare, and of course, Middle East, and Iran, and the war between Israel and Hamas. And I could really recommend for people who want credible information delivered timely and analysis. FDD provides that to people. Most of what I know, for instance, regarding Iran, I'm not a nuclear expert, but I learn from nuclear experts at FDD. Mark Dubovitz, the CEO, and others who know a lot about the topic and have been following it for many years. They analyze things and create a lot of knowledge for others and use it. So definitely when it comes to defending democracy, counterterrorism, threats against Western values and Western society, FDD is probably one of the best, if not the best, source of information that people can have. They are on X, on Twitter, on YouTube, lots of interviews, lots of performances there, and of course a website where they send daily, sometimes hourly flash briefs about topics, and of course bigger investigative pieces as well on bigger, that we call that the bigger pieces of research. The name evades me for a second, but bigger pieces of research about other topics as well that are available. So thank you for offering the opportunity to speak about FDD.
One of the things
Yes.
that you do, if I remember correctly, is that you've also been doing a lot of research on where the money flows from Qatar and from Iran and so forth, and into the Western democracies, and how it's affected that, which is an issue that's completely neglected in Norway and possibly also in Sweden and Denmark, where we don't know, both the money and the information flows. I mean, we have a conversation in the open here, right? But there's lots of conversations on the other side that are concealed. I mean, at least I'm not aware of any sort of hidden messages sort of on our side, but I know that there's a lot of suspicious things going on.
100%. And the FDD monitors that, and is one of the few, if not the only, American think tank that doesn't take any foreign money. FDD takes American civilian contributions. It's a 501(c)(3), so tax deductible for American citizens. And the only people who can donate to FDD are American citizens. I think they allow Canadians as well, but American and Canadians, and that's it. No government money from nobody, not from Israel, not from European countries, nothing. It's only American money.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and it's interesting. Also, at the same time, you also have your own show now, right? On X, which is called The Bottom Line. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's something that a colleague of mine, Ariella Novak, we started it a few weeks ago, basically responding to, again, the issue of people that have come to me and said, we are so overwhelmed with so much information. We hear lots of things that are happening, and we read, the New York Times and BBC and others, and we want to be informed about what's happening, but we also feel that we're getting bad information, biased information, and we want information we can trust. So what we're trying to do together and with the team that supports us, is to provide information and analysis about what's going on in and around Israel to people who care about the topic. It's not funded by the Israeli government. It's not funded by any official institution. It's donors who contribute, who want to be able to have access to that kind of information. And I do topical analysis of what's going on. A few days ago, I analyzed the whole issue of the humanitarian aid coming into Gaza, how it's working, and who is trying to derail it. Much about what we spoke in the opening minutes of this talk. And I'm going to be speaking about peace with Lebanon and Syria and other topics. It depends on what's going on and what I think people aren't getting in international media, but probably would be very interested in hearing. And that's what we aspire to do. We also aspire to help journalists be professional in their coverage of the conflict in the Middle East. So to bring journalists here and to make information available to journalists so that they can make good professional work when they're reflecting on the situation, which we acknowledge. It's difficult to obtain correct and verified information, especially if you want to be first or if you want to be fast. And the journalists are under a lot of pressure to be first or to be fast. And many times they compromise the veracity and truthfulness because they want to be first, and then they report based on Hamas information or Hezbollah or the Iranians or whatever, and they don't wait for verified information, or they don't give a balanced picture of what's going on. So we try to help with that, and basically to try to give people a better understanding of what's going on in and around Israel.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and thank you so much for informing us about all of these topics. You have so much information, and it's great that you took the time to talk to us here today on Friday. How does the weekend look for you? Do you keep Shabbat and all these things in Israel?
Yeah, it's family time, Shabbat dinner. Every week we count our blessings, and we are so grateful that we are free, we're safe, we're healthy, that we live in our homeland, and that we're able to, I'm able to see my children and embrace them, and together with my wife, very, very fortunate. We never fail to acknowledge how important that is, and how grateful we are for the basics of life. So we will have family time, and for the weekend, it's high summer in Israel, so it's very hot already. I don't know how the weather is now in Norway, but I'm sure that it is less hot than here. And we'll try to make good use of that. But it's sometimes there's quite a dissonance between the personal situation and the general situation of the state of Israel. And we're always very grateful for all of the liberties we have living in a free democratic society, that we're safe, that we have food on our table, and that we're healthy. And we know, sadly, of many, many Israelis, many families that have been shattered by people that were taken hostage, that were murdered, or soldiers that were wounded in combat, or soldiers that were killed in combat. And we always thank every meal. We thank our good fortune, and we thank the people who make those sacrifices, who are keeping us safe.
Yes, indeed.
And last word, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for standing up. Thank you for supporting. Thank you for giving Norwegians and people around the world the option to hear a different perspective. I never tell anybody what they're supposed to think and believe. I believe that people should be able to have access to information and then make their own cognitive adult decision, what they believe and how they act. And I think it's very, very sorely needed for different voices to be out there, voices that are not automatically critical of Israel, but present things in a different way. Not that Israel is perfect and Israel is beyond criticism at all, but I think what's missing is voices like yours, Henrik and Leif, that provide that option for people who don't want to be part of the herd and don't want to be told what they're supposed to believe and say and act, and want to think for themselves. And I think that's super important. That is what Western society and civilization is based upon, critical thinking. And I think what you guys are doing is making that available for people on the topic here of Middle East and Israel. So I thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you so much.
I'll just say your full credentials here, because I forgot to say in the start of the podcast, is that you are a senior fellow at the think tank for Foundation for Defense of Democracies based in Washington. You were also the former international spokesperson of IDF from 2017 to 2021. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everybody who's been listening and watching the show today. And Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.